Hi Sam, I thought I'd do a very quick video explainer just talking through some of the capital growth data for Kingston. And I'm going to just go here. Here we are. Okay, I haven't read Kingston, if that makes sense, because I don't really concentrate on London or this area. I'm much more interested in what goes on in central London because we have some property there. And obviously, I'm interested in Gerrard's Cross because we got property there. And at Kingston, I just haven't really paid a great deal of attention to, honestly. But to uh, to simplify this a little bit, I think what I'll do is just look at the long-term story here first, and then the so this is the 2008 to date story. And the thing with London is that central London drove the rest of the market. So whilst, in fact, where am I? Let me just get the 2008 to 2013 one because that is kind of weird and interesting at the same time. And here we are. I'll just enable that. So central London did this strange thing where everywhere else was crashing in the country, and you can see minuses everywhere, but you see lots of pluses here. It's just kind of odd. But that was because people were looking for a safe haven for money, and they dived into central London to shelter cash, basically. And at that stage, London was very attractive because stamp duty wasn't so bad as it is today, and there were less restrictions for international buyers, and just generally it was a lot more friendly to invest here at that time. And then from 2013 or 2000, let's see, so 2000, I'm just looking at the 2013 to 21 story. Then whilst everywhere else gained, London crashed. So you can see here how central London essentially went sideways. Now, nominally, i.e., if you adjust for inflation or don't adjust for inflation, prices kind of stayed sideways for quite a long time. But overall, central London stagnated, and then the outer part of London did really well. So it was just a kind of an inverse cycle, which was really odd. And the same, well, different patterns occurred in Manchester. So the whole of Manchester rose, and the whole of Manchester declined. Well, let me just show you. It's easier. And there's Manchester. And you can see, or you will see, right, so this is 13 to 21, and if I go 8 to 13, then you can see, switch them over, and there we are. So the whole of Manchester crashed in the crash, and then the whole of Manchester rose in the resurgence. And as I say, London was this weird thing where it was kind of counter-cyclical. So when I think about London, I've done quite a lot of work on property cycles and where I think they're all going to go and so on. And you can watch that video if you're interested, and I'll drop you a link. But overall, we're obviously in the boom phase, and one of the big metrics I'm very interested in, without repeating myself with the other video, is this whole thing about affordability and how affordability is decreasing, but we're not in peak cycle yet. So I think there's headroom. But for me, the real question is, what about London in this context? What about London? And I feel that it all comes down to distress, global distress. In other words, the world comes to London to find shelter in the event of um, in the event of uh, trouble. So we have trouble in Ukraine. We have essentially a trouble in China or with China. And I expect we're going to see lots and lots of, let me just hide these just to simplify everything for you. And we'll go to 1821, show that layer. So anyway, this one, just to explain what we're looking at, is the difference between, so the inner one is the house price, sorry, yeah, the inner one is the price growth, the outer one is the outer ring is the cost of property, relatively speaking. And you can see in for example, the East End of London, property is relatively cheaper. I mean, it's still crazy expensive, but relatively cheaper. In West London, lots of dark red. It's relatively more expensive. And you can see how in the last few years, the really expensive real estate just isn't doing great. There are little patches, and you get these little anomalies because maybe there's well, let's see. So quite often it's because there's local authority housing, and the housing gets sold off, and it's sold at a huge discount and then resold onto the market, and that skews the figures. And I think that's what's probably going on in little patches like this. But the really expensive real estate, it's not doing great in central London. We have a place in Westminster where we're watching carefully, and my hope is that as things get more and more gnarly, that people will, international buyers will come back into central London and buy in central London as a safety thing, as a store of wealth. And the reason for that is inflation. And if we look at historic inflation, we can see here that it's basically very similar to the 40s in that you have a lot of, well, I explained in the video, but the short is I don't see crazy inflation like the 70s. I do see big spikes of inflation like the 40s and going into the 50s. And I see relatively low interest rates for probably another 5 years. But as you see here, in peaks, in spikes of inflation, you do have rises in interest rates. And that's simply because the government has to be seen to do something. So I do see some rise in interest rates, and therefore that's a threat. But I don't see interest rates doing what they did in the 70s because the macroeconomic conditions are just completely different. Anyway, back to Kingston and what's going on there. So Kingston is okay-ish. Whenever I look at capital growth numbers for an area, I always like to zoom in a little bit, look at the demographics, and also look at the type of property in an area. And I suspect that a lot of Kingston is probably kind of overbought a little bit at 667 median house price. So if we go here, so what I think is going on generally is that there is, people are prepared to move out further in order to get a bit of value. So let's have a look at this. And you can see the median house prices are actually much cheaper. So I guess what's going on is that people are prepared to put up with a longer commute to live in a nicer house that has value. So you get these places where there is value and prices are going up. And this is common with Manchester as well, where areas like Radcliffe and Lee and the suburban satellite towns are doing really well because they offer value, relatively speaking. And Kingston would be the same. And bear in mind that when we look at these figures, they are adjusted. They're adjusted for inflation. But what's actually going on is that nominally it's just going sideways. So most people just think, oh, my house isn't worth much more, but it's worth £2,000 more than it was 3 years ago, because they just don't factor in inflation. But the truth is, the value of the property has dropped by 6%. Um, if I was buying for capital growth, I would be careful with Kingston. But if you're buying for lifestyle, well, then you don't care, do you? So you just buy. And then you have places like Esher, and this is kind of a common thing where areas that are further out have more value, and people are okay with the extra commute, so they'll put up with it because they get a nicer house. And that's kind of what you're seeing in a lot of London. So if I just change this one and I go back to the 18 to 21 one, you can see, like, on a high level what's going on. So hopefully that'll show. Come on. I have settings so that now what I want to do is just zoom out a little bit and then look at the colors, because that really helps us understand what's going on. So you can see in central, I'm just looking for this one. This is the one I want. Lots of layers. This is kind of a master map, and it helps me just go deep, as it were, into all of this and understand what's going on. Okay, this is easier to interpret because it's just one thing, which is 18 to 21 house prices. Anyway, broadly, you can see there is a pattern, which is that the further out you go, the more red you see, or at least cream color. And this is consistent with Manchester as well. So the overall story is that if you were to go a little bit further out from Kingston, you'd probably find that you'll get more value, and other people will feel the same and they will want to move further out. But it's all relative. And the thing I've noticed with our little patch in Gerrard's Cross, where are we, is that it's doing really well, which surprises me in a way. But I kind of know why, because even though house prices are relatively high in Gerrard's Cross, the housing stock is very good. The schools are really good. It's where you can get a lot of space for your money, and therefore people are competing for that. And it's about 20 minutes into central London, to Marylebone Station, so it's a convenient location, and that's why we're lucky that our house is going up in value and all that, because it's a place people want to be, and it fits the model of the story of nice place further out, like Chalfont, Little Chalfont, beautiful little spot, very, very nice, good railway access, big houses. It's value. So the theme is people want value and they'll pay extra for it, and they don't want to be in crowded central London. And people who do want to be in central London, they're there because they have to put up with it because it's close to work. But then for London, most of the highly paid work is knowledge work, and knowledge workers don't have to be tied to a desk in central London. They can live further out, and that's what they do. The tech guy I work with lives out in Kent somewhere, out here, and he works for, his day job is for a big bank, and then he does the tech stuff on the side with me. Same story, he lives further out, and he wants to live even further out because that way he can get more value. So I hope that helps. Just do the main screen. There we go. Where am I? There we go. Yeah. So I think Kingston is interesting. I wouldn't buy there if I was thinking about capital growth. I would think about the fundamentals first. As I say, reiterating value. And that comes down to understanding your square footage and cost per square foot and quality of amenities, and understanding the idea that people put up with a longer commute if they don't have to commute so often. So they want to be in reach of London, but they don't want to be doing that trip every day. And that's why the pattern shows that overall the growth is further out, not further in. And I think this is a persistent theme. And I also think one of the problems with central London is that there is a glut of apartments being built. And the catch with all of these apartments are, like in Paddington Basin, for example, the catch with them all is uh, they, the projects began years ago. And of course, if I go here, there are huge swathes of apartments. In fact, if I go to here, for example, into beyond Hanger Lane and along Western Avenue, here we are here, there are massive developments going on around here, for example. In Westfield, just huge build, this kind of thing. And there's loads of them going on around London. But the thing about these projects are they started 12, 15 years ago, or say 10 years ago, um, when there was value or whatever. And of course, this one, funnily enough, is build to rent. And there's quite a few of these now coming up. A friend of mine was involved in this, and he was a senior project manager in it. And then you've got Paddington, which is huge. And then you've got all of this build around here, going into Edgware, huge amount of new build going on. And I just think, how many people actually want to live in expensive lifestyle 2-bedroom apartments? Plus, of course, you've got the cladding issue with Grenfell Tower. As you know, cladding, fire safety certification. There's something like 100,000 people stuck in apartments that can't be sold because the cladding problem. So there's quite a lot of stuff to think about with London. And overall, I think London's amazing. I love it. Oh, I didn't share my screen. Sorry. I'll just quickly show you this. So there's just basically a massive amount of new build going on still. But the thing with these new build projects is they start like 10 years ago, and they're kind of coming to fruition, and they've kind of got their timing right because we're entering the boom phase. But the thing I don't know about central London is whether this market will really pick up as people go into central London to basically store wealth. And at some point, I think the government will have to make a decision as to whether they ease off on stamp duty, which is just a decision. They can do that. If they do, and they make expensive property cheaper, then that will unlock the natural suppression of that market. And then that rises. And then you get the knock on effect where you get this kind of ripple effect because people tend to trade down, they move out, and so on. And then that rescues the property market. It's really down to how the government plays this out. But overall, I think London has a glut of lifestyle 2-bedroom apartments. You can't really raise a family in these. They're expensive to live in. The cost of living in London is incredibly high. And the model relies on centralized employment, i.e., people living or working in places like this and commuting from apartments living here. And the catch is that this model is kind of defunct. There is still such a thing as office space. It's not going away. It's just not as important as it used to be for so many businesses. So anyway, there you go. I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much.